colleagues were involved in this too. It was all coming out of the same, it was the main academic center in the country on this. That was coming from the same laboratory that was 100% funded by the three armed services. That has to do with a fact about the advanced economies, which is pretty well understood by participants, engineers. It doesn't seem to be well understood by economists or the general public. And that is that the modern economy depends very heavily on massive state intervention. If you use a computer, the internet, satellites, microelectronics, the information technology, IT revolution, and so on, you're feeding off of public funding and public initiative. And the Pentagon understood that. It was the funnel for raiding the taxpayer under false pretenses. The Russians are coming. So it wasn't democratic at all. But it was essentially telling the public, you pay us, we're going to create the technology of the future. They didn't say that, but that's what was happening. So they didn't really care what you were doing. You want to overthrow the government, that's your business. Just do your work, But that was although that was the fact, that was a very small part of the Institute. Most of the Institute was extremely conventional. People did their work, didn't ask questions, you just developed science and technology. This kind of, this Tom Lehrer song about Werner von Braun, which you may know. Where the rockets the rockets go up, where they come down is not my business. And that was essentially the conception. Well, there was a small group of students, very small, maybe a dozen or so, in the 1960s, who began to be caught up in the general student activism in the 60s and worked quite hard to try to change the atmosphere. I won't go through the details, but they succeeded. Succeeded to the point that by, say, the end of the 69, it got to the point where actually the administration called a day off just to focus on seminars, discussions, talks, and so on about the uses of technology. Should we be concerned with how science and technology are used? And a lot of self-criticism came out of that. Quite important groups formed, Union of Concerned Scientists and so on. It just changed the atmosphere of the place. And by now those are common attitudes. What was once you just do your work and shut up has become we have to think about what we're doing and why. And that expands into other forms of social activism too in all sorts of ways. I mean, one very dramatic change at MIT, you can just see it walking down the halls. When I got there in the 50s, it was all white, male, well-dressed, conventional, do your work. You walk down the halls today, it's like universities elsewhere. Half women, a third minorities, informal dress, which is not insignificant. That means informal relationships, and a lot of activism. Those are quite big changes. They came about largely through the activism of small groups of students, a couple of faculty, but mostly students, who just essentially organized the place through their own activities. A lot of interesting actions took place which changed things. So what is a university? Well, it depends on the people in it. They can turn it, these are very